G'day divers and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a review of Inon's UCL G55 close-up lens. This is the most macro lens that you can get for your action camera. If you're new to my channel, I'm Sean Elliott and I've been doing underwater videography and photography for over 25 years. This channel is dedicated to using action cameras and smartphones paired with economical aftermarket accessories to get some great underwater shots. I want to show you that you do not need to spend a fortune or carry around kilos and kilos of equipment to get some really awesome underwater images. If you want to know how to use your action camera and smartphone to get shots like these, then please like and subscribe to my channel. First things first, I am not being sponsored by Inon or anybody. I'm not trying to convince you to buy this lens. If you don't want to buy the lens, don't buy the lens. All this is a video to explain my experience with the G55. And there's few people, I'm going to be blatant, that have the experience I have underwater with action cameras and smartphones. To give you an idea, I was professionally trained. I've been doing videography for a long time. I became obsessed with action cameras and smartphones, been using them a lot. Last year, I spent 210 hours underwater with an action camera or smartphone filming. So I'm not talking about leading a dive or teaching and I've got a GoPro shoved in my pocket. I'm talking about those dives were underwater videography and photography dives. That was the purpose, using an action camera or a smartphone. I just love doing it. A couple of days ago, I spent 4 hours underwater just pottering around, just taking photos, video with a smartphone on that one. So I have used all the GoPros. I currently have the Ace Pro 2, the DJI Action 6, and the GoPro Hero 13. I will show you footage from all three cameras in this video using this lens, and I have used all the lens options for an action camera, so I can comfortably tell you that this lens currently, as of February 2026, is the most macro you'll get for an action camera and the best looking image you will get on an action camera. Now for my smartphone viewers, I wouldn't use this lens on a smartphone. Same reason is, I'll talk about it later, of why I wouldn't use a 67mm on an action camera. This lens will work on a smartphone, but not perfectly well. It is designed for an action camera. You know, 67mm lenses aren't designed for an action camera. Same thing. Will a 67mm work on an action camera? Yeah, but not great. This lens won't work great on a smartphone. So if you're using a smartphone, stick to your 67mm lenses. I'll be making more videos on those sorts of things. But if you're using a DJI Action series, an Insta360 Pro series, Ace Pro series, or a GoPro series, then this is the best quality and closest shot you will get with an action camera. So a few stats about this lens. So the one probably downside to this lens is price. Like here in Australia, it's 529 Australian dollars. As an Australian, I will stick to using Underwater Australasia. That's our largest underwater camera store, and the price that we pay here. So wherever you are, look it up. Percentage wise between the lenses, the prices are fairly similar, but there's such a big variation in price. You know, I will use the price in Australia as I'm Australian. So this is 529 Australian dollars. And, you know, that is considerably dearer than some of your other options, but also cheaper than some of your options. So it's probably, I would say, in the upper range, but not crazy. But for that, you do get the best quality and the most macro. Now, we'll go through the other options in a bit and show you some comparison shots where I've set up a little guy so you can see what the differences are between those lenses. But we'll go through, you know, the pros and cons of this lens, and then I'll talk about specifically what your other macro options are for your action camera. So Inon make a range of close-up lenses. There's the G165 II, which is 110 degrees. Then there's the G100, which I have here. That is 90 degrees, and the same field of view that, say, the AOI UCL 03 is. And that is 90 degrees. Then the G55, which is 45 degrees. And basically they go in 2 times increments. So the G100 is twice as macro as the G165, and the G55 is twice as macro as the G100, or 4 times more than the G165. Now there's a number of nice things I like about the Inon lenses. First of all, they use a bayonet mount. So One reason I don't like 67mm or just threaded lenses, full stop, is threaded lenses weren't designed for being used underwater. That was designed for putting filters, like an ND filter on the front of a lens above water. Certainly not for in the sea and the salt and trying to screw them on. So whenever you can use a bayonet, system where you just need to do that and it's on and it's locked in place, brilliant. So if you're wondering, there is an SD version and a ZD version. Why they kept them so close to similar in name, but what it is you sort of got to decide which wide lens you're going to go for to decide whether you use an SD or a ZD. So there is no difference in the lens. You're talking about the size of the bayonet, and it comes down to the wide-angled lens. So when you're talking about, say, the AOI UW03 wide-angled lens, Inon has a G140 lens, and it's the same size at the back as the AOI, and that is the SD. So if you're currently using the AOI wide-angled lens or the Inon G140, then you'll be using, either the Inon's SD version or the AOI QRS02 version, which is smaller. So if you are using AOI or the G140, you'll need the SD version of this. If you are using the better Inon GR140, yes, Inon, I don't know why they keep their names so similar. It just makes life very difficult. So the G140 has the small back that is like the AOI UWL03. The GR, so they add an R. It's still the same lens at the front, but at the back, it is much, much bigger. And the advantage of that is, unlike the AOI or the backscatter sharp lens or the G140, you can use this on a full frame. So when you use the AOI or the backscatter, the most commonly used wide-angled lenses, they only work in 16:9. So if you use the GoPro, you can't film an 8:7. If you use the Ace Pro 2, it won't work in 4:3. And if you're talking the DJI Action 6, it won't work at 1:1. But if you use the GR140 ZD, you can film the whole sensor. So it's one really nice thing about it. But because it had the bigger back, that meant that the SD or the QRS system was too small. It wouldn't fit, so they had to create a new bayonet. It's just bigger, and it's called ZD. So because if you want to use this lens, you're using the bigger faceplate, they then, of course, make G55s, G100s, etc. in either SD or ZD. So you really just got to decide, are you going to be using the smaller AOI backscatter sharp lens or G140, or are you going to jump up to using the GR140 and having the beauty of being able to shoot full frame, in which case you buy the ZD version. Apart from that, it works exactly the same. It's just the bigger bayonet system. The next advantage of the G55, just like the AOI UCL or the backscatter macromate, this is a lens designed for an action camera. It isn't just a generic 67mm lens that was designed really for a compact or even a DSLR, where it was really designed for a 24mm or even maybe a 70 or 110mm lens. These lenses are designed for action cameras, and action cameras are very unique. You're talking about an extremely wide field of view, a fixed aperture. I mean, even the DJI, it has a variable aperture, but it goes from f2 to f4. It's hardly f2 to f20, So you're talking fixed aperture basically, or very close to a fixed focus, and that focus distance is quite a long way out, really long way out, and a very wide field of view, very, very wide field of view, and that isn't what 67mm of lenses are for. So these lenses are specifically designed to deal with that type of camera, which means you get a better result because it's designed for an action camera. The next thing I love about the Inons are these focusing sticks. This makes this the easiest macro lens to use on an action camera. Because if you're using a 67mm lens, your only option, because they all vary, because they weren't designed for an action camera, is you're going to have to move in and out and sort of guess where the focus point is. You really can't tell on the back of the screen. You can tell pretty well, but it's still guesswork. If you're using a backscatter macromate, they give you a little guide. You can't be using this all the time, so you really got to learn what that distance is. And again, I would suggest that you'd want to take a few shots to make sure you get the shot in focus. Whereas when you're looking at the Inons, they come with these awesome little focusing sticks. So you can have them both up, you can have one down, you can have both down. And they tell you exactly where the focusing distance is. So the outside is for the GoPro Hero 13 or the DJI Action 6 if you're in f4, because you have the most depth of field on those two cameras at that point. If you are using the Ace Pro 2 or the DJI Action 5 or the DJI Action 6 at 2.8, then you're going to have just the distance in the little ones in between. So there's less. I think it's 8 mil compared to 14 mil. There is a fair bit of difference in the depth of field because of that f4 on the DJI Action 6 and because of the GoPro has always had better depth of field. So it gives you for all those action cameras, and what you can do is, I love it because you can put them down and use it like a tripod. So when I put it on the bottom, you can literally rest it on the sand. It makes it nice and balanced, and your little critter just automatically ends up inside that focusing distance. You can look down, you don't need to be looking at the screen, you don't need to be trying to measure anything, you don't need to be guessing. You know when your critter is inside those guides that everything is in focus. Makes life so much easier and works with like a tripod function to get that nice smooth shot, because when you're this magnified, any movement whatsoever is going to be noticeable. So you really want to either have your buoyancy nailed down or be using some sort of tripod. The other thing I like about these focusing sticks is you can use them to your advantage, like more on the G100, and I will have a full video on the G100 coming up. But, you know, one thing I was using in Indonesia was if I wanted to adjust which side a critter was facing, like for instance, there was a ribbon eel. Ribbon eels are easily distracted, you know, so if I had both arms up like this, the ribbon eel would look at the lens. It can probably see itself in the lens. It would look at the lens. If I wanted the ribbon eel side on, I would move that arm down and he couldn't help himself but stare at this arm and wonder what it is. He'd turn side on and I get a nice side on shot. So they have many advantages. You can use them to know exactly that something's in focus. You can use them to help balance like a tripod, and you can use them to distract your little critter to get him to look one way or the other if that's something you want to do as part of your creative shot. Lens quality wise, this lens is better than the Macromate and all your other options really, and if you want a better quality 67mm, you're going to spend a lot more money than this. The only 67mm that would come close to being as macro as this, you would need a Pro Plus 23 diopter lens, and you'd be talking probably 800 to 1,000 Australian dollars for one of those, and it's still not going to be as flexible or as good as the G55. I would not bother. I'd be using the G55. Not only do you have those focus sticks, but the other beautiful thing about the Inon lens is it will work at 2 times or 1.4 in linear on a GoPro, so 2 times on a DJI Action 6 or an Ace Pro 2, and 1.4 times in linear on a GoPro. It will also work in wide. So a backscatter Macromate or a 67mm lens will not work in wide. You will see the lens, so you can only use them when zoomed in. The beautiful thing about this lens is you can use it at 1 times or zoomed in. Your only other option is the Inon UCL 03, and it was designed only to be used in wide. So this is really this range of lenses, these close-up lenses from Inon, are your only option if you want to be able to shoot in wide and zoomed in. All your other options are either designed to be used in wide or to be used zoomed in. So because you can use this in wide, you can use it on a DJI Action 5, just like you can use the Inon UCL 03 on a DJI Action 5. Would I? No, I wouldn't. You know, it is the downside of the DJI system. If you're Action 5 or earlier, I will not use a digital zoom, and using it in wide, it's just not that macro. To spend $529 to shoot at 1 times all the time, it's just not worth it. On top of that, the DJI lens, not this lens, the DJI itself has a lot of issues with distortion on the edges. So, for instance, I like the DJI, don't get me wrong. There's things about it I like, and I'll be doing a video on the pros and cons of all of them, but it has the worst lens underwater. There's no argument about that. If you use this in wide above water without a wet lens, there is a fair bit of distortion and blurriness on the edges that the other two just don't have. And you will notice it with macro lenses. So if you use this in wide with a macro lens, is it usable? Yeah, you can use it, but you do have some softness and distortion on the edges, which you don't get with the GoPro or the Ace Pro 2. And that's why if I was using an Action 5, just upgrade. Get yourself one of these if you want to do macro. You're never going to get good macro. You're going to have to deal with that distortion, and you're only going to be able to use it at a 1x lens. You don't have that 2x sensor crop that you have on the Ace Pro 2 and the DJI Action 6, or the added benefit of being able to use linear with a 1.4x zoom on the GoPro because it's 5.3K. So to give you an idea, this is the little guy that I'm going to use in some of the shots that you're going to see. I have taken a still so it's easier, all done measured in a tub at the distances that each lens says, so there's no argument. The problem with shooting in the ocean is the same type of nudibranch changes in size, they all move, all that sort of stuff, so it's impossible to give you an indication of how each one is. So I set up a tub, I put this little guy in there, and that way I can show you the difference. So really, a macromate's going to shoot most of him. Down to a G55 and an Ace Pro 2, you're going to get his head. Out of interest, if you wanted to jump up to any more than macro than that, if I'm using my mobile phone, I can get his eye. That's how much more macro a phone is. So let's talk about the other options. So your other options is the Backscatter Macromate Mini. This is probably still your cheapest option, really. Cheapest realistic option. This is a +15 diopter that Backscatter originally made. I think it was 2014. I've owned one ever since then. Not this one, I've lost a few of them. But it was the original lens for GoPro. It came out for the Hero 3, designed for an action camera. I would use this over any 67mm lens, no doubt about it. The only thing is, price has gone up a lot over the years. I paid under $100 Australian for my first Macromate. It is now 210 Australian dollars, or a little bit more sometimes. And of course, back then we used to always use the flip system. So, you know, it screwed straight on the flip system. Now, if you want to be using wide-angled lenses and bayonet systems, you need an adapter. That's about another $85. So you're talking about $300 for the Backscatter Macromate now, when I paid like 90 Australian dollars back then. So price has gone up a lot. Don't get me wrong, if these were the same price, G55 every day of the week, but there's still a difference between $300 and $529, of course. But for that extra money, you get better lens quality, you get more macro, you get better control of chromatic aberration, and you get these awesome focusing sticks. And this lens will only work when you're zoomed in. It won't work in wide, whereas this lens will work in wide and in zoomed in. Your next option after that would be the AOI UCL 03. I used to own it. I don't currently own it. It is fairly similar in the sense to the G100. It's a 90 degrees. It was designed to be used in wide. It's very nice in wide. It was designed to be a better quality. It wasn't designed to be zoomed in. So I can't remember how much that one is. It's slightly cheaper than the G55. But it's nowhere near as macro as the G55. And like I said, it's designed to be used in wide, not for being zoomed in. I would take the G100 over the AOI UCL 03 lens. Next option while I'm talking about that is to not go as macro and go for the UCL G100. And, you know, it's not as macro, but it is more versatile and about the same macro, obviously, as the Macromate Mini. So again, your advantage is you've got focusing sticks, you've got the fact that you can use it at 1x and 2x, and you've just got a much bigger depth of field. If you're trying to say, like this is for say shooting the eyeball of a moray eel, this has the ability of shooting the entire moray eel, especially in wide. So they do go hand in hand. I will be having a video on the G100. I'll show you some shots on the screen, the difference, plus I have a short that shows you the difference between the wide, zoomed in, wide and zoomed in of these two lenses. It really depends on what size subject you're trying to shoot. And finally, you've got, you know, 67mm lenses. I mentioned it earlier in the video. I do not recommend that you use 67mm lenses on a action camera, not the macro lenses. First of all, if you can avoid using a threaded lens full stop on any underwater camera ever, then find a way. I'm actually going to update my Divote probably at some point to a Bayonet system. You can buy Bayonet systems that screw in and lock it in. The advantage of threaded lenses, of course, is it means you've got a much bigger range of lenses you can pick from. But trying to thread a threaded lens on underwater, that's not what it was designed for. That was designed for putting filters above water, not for trying to do it in salt, sand, underwater. They're a pain. A Bayonet's much quicker. That's the first thing. The next thing is, don't blame the 67mm lenses. These were not designed to work on a 13, 12mm equivalent wide lens with a very long focus distance and all that sort of stuff. They were predominantly designed for 24mm to 110mm lenses, depends on what macro we're talking about. So they work very well on your smartphone. You know, your main lens on your smartphone is a 24mm equivalent. Your telephoto might be 110mm equivalent. These work fine. So just like I said, this lens doesn't work, it works, but it doesn't work amazingly on an action camera. These will work. You will be able to get them to work, but they don't work as well and cost more money. So there's a lot of cheap 67mm macro lenses. They are terrible on an action camera. You need to be getting a good quality one. This is a plus 18. I'll show you a shot. It is more money than the G55 and it's not as macro. If you wanted to jump up to being this macro, you would probably need to look at, say, a Pro plus 23, and then you would be looking at, you know, $850, I would say. And then again, you're dealing with a threaded lens. You've got no focusing sticks. You're going to have to go in and out. God knows where it is. You've got to try and line it up and all that sort of stuff. Look, if you already own some really good quality, very powerful, you know, I'm talking you've got to be at least plus 18 or more, then, you know, try your 67mm. But, you know, anything less than that, I mean, I would use the Macromate Mini. Where did I put that? The Macromate Mini is here somewhere. The Macromate Mini, this is a plus 15. This will outshoot any plus 15 67mm in a pro range. So that's $200. If you're buying a pro 67mm lens, you're probably looking at $500-600 at least Australian, and this lens will work better. So why pay 3 times as much for a lens that's 3 times bigger for no need, because it's for an action camera and doesn't get as good a quality. And before anybody asks, yes, I've tried. I do it all the time. So I have tried plus 6s, plus 8s, plus 12s, plus 18s, different brands, cheap ones, medium ones, pro ones. I own dozens of 60mm lenses. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's another one, there's more. I mean, I own heaps of them. So I've tried them all, and they will work. So if you do own them, then you know, give it a crack. But I certainly haven't found one. And like I said, I put on the screen the differences I got between the plus 18 Pro lens, it's worth more, and the G55, and you'll see the G55 is more macro. So I would definitely be sticking with the lenses that are designed to be used on an action camera. So there you go. From the pictures you've seen, as you can see, the G55 will give you the best shot. It's a question of whether value for money, whether you think it's worth paying, you know, jumping up to that price of the G55, and whether you want to or have the skills to shoot critters that small. Because, you know, the more macro you go, the less depth of field you're going to have, the harder it is to take a shot. So you may want to start with the G100 or the Macromate. The nice advantage really is, especially the G100. The G100 is probably the easiest macro lens to use overall, because you've got a much bigger depth of field because it's not as zoomed in. You can use it at wide, you can use it at 2 times, and you've got the focusing stick. So I'll have a video coming up on that. So unless you're obsessed with getting really close in, you know, you might be better off going to back to the G100, and it's $100 cheaper. I like to be as macro as you like. I actually like to take both, and it gives me a full range. You know, that's why I've got the holder up here. I'll normally take the G55 and the G100. I find if you like, I could take 3 lenses, but then you spend so much time changing lenses, then you get a shot of nothing. So sometimes you just got to go, well, today I'm shooting this lens. The more options you give yourself, half the time you spend most of the dive changing lenses and settings and just don't shoot anything. So, but you know, you might want to go back to the G100 if you're new to macro, and this overall, out of all those options, is the easiest lens to shoot with. This is the most macro lens and still easy to shoot with than, say, using a 67mm because of these focusing sticks. And if you want to get as small as you can on an action camera, then this is the way to go. If you want to get this small without it being too difficult, look at going into a smartphone. Look at my videos on Divoke, because this sort of size with a phone is still easy. Like I said, I can get down to the eyeball of this little guy on a phone, but then that is a particularly hard shot. But shooting this guy's head, I could almost shoot his head with a phone without a wet lens. So I'm going to have a fair bit more depth of field to play with. And obviously I've got a screen I can look at. I've got focus peaking. I've got better stabilization actually underwater, I reckon. You know, I've got access to shutter speeds and all that sort of stuff. So really shooting really tight macro on an action camera, about the same on a smartphone, is easier. But then of course you get sucked into wanting to shoot down to the tiny little few millimeters, and that isn't easy, especially from a videography point of view, because now you've somehow got to keep steady as well. So like I said, I will have a lot more videos coming up. I'm going to have some videos on doing the DJI with macro in its settings. I already have videos out there for the Ace Pro 2 and its settings. The macro settings that you use with the Macromate are the same as the G55. So I don't need another macro setting video. Same with the GoPro. It doesn't matter which macro lens you use. They are the same. The only difference is, of course, with the G55, you can have one in wide as well. But I will be doing one on the DJI. I will have a video coming up soon on a full review of the G100 as well. And I might do a video that specifically talks about all the different macro options. You know, I don't know, if you ignore the price, if price is not an issue, this to me is the best macro lens you're going to get if you want to get as close as you possibly can. If price is an issue, well, that's different. You might want to go back to the Macromate, or if this is too much zoom, then consider the G100. Let me know in the comments if you've got anything, any questions, any thoughts, whether you've used them and you've liked them. If you've got any questions at all or got any ideas of videos you want me to make, then let me know. I'll try and answer all the comments that I get. Like I said, I do this for a hobby. I do it for fun. So, you know, I got no reason for you to buy any of this stuff. I just like buying stuff and trying stuff. But until the next time, don't forget to keep blowing bubbles, and never forget, the deeper you go, the further you get away from all those idiots.